Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for live streaming. This is already I have introduced various facts about the financial services. When we are talking about the financial services in the previous three classes, already we have discussed about the various aspects which are provided, various financial services which are provided by the various financial intermediaries. As financial intermediaries are a part of financial system which provides the linkage between the service as well as the person who requires the finance. That means in terms we can say that the person who is saving the money or who is ready to provide the money at the time who is required to borrow the money or who is in need versus surplus. These aspects that we have covered in the very beginning, right from the beginning classes. So I wish to bring to your already notice that. So earlier classes, we have covered about three classes. In the three classes, this is actually the next three classes which are scheduled by the our reputed institution. So in the very first three classes, I have given introduction about the financial services and introduction aspect. Then all the financial services which are provided by the by the various financial intermediaries, what is the financial system and how the financial system works out and all. Then out of the financial, what the type of services they are providing, that what are the type of services that they are providing, that means fund-based financial services and fee-based financial services. These are covered under the unit number 2, which is a part of your block 1. So in the financial intermediary system, let us roughly sum out of that, and then we'll proceed one by one. So those who have not attended the previous classes, about one point out of that one, so that you will have a linkage between what I have covered in the previous class and what I'm going to cover in this particular class. So before going to that, actually, what is the financial system? That financial institutions, financial markets, everything else, which financial instruments, financial service providers, all this put together, they are called as a financial system. The primary objective of the financial system is to provide a linkage between the person who is having a surplus money and who is not having a requirement of the money. That is called as we can say that from the financial service providers to the borrower. A person who is in need of financial services, they are considered to be the person who is in need of financial borrower, and the person who is having surplus money, they are financial providers. And then what are financial services? Basically talking about the mobilization and allocation of the savings to the needy. So how you can able to mobilize the money that is which is having a surplus from one person from the other person who is having a need. This process comes under the financial services. And the basic characteristic of financial services broadly we have discussed in the 1.3 page number actually 1.3 paragraph number. In that, we can say that in derivatives, capitalist distribution of risk, and all these aspects that we have taken. Then, why these financial services are important, in that we can broadly speak, already discussed about that. That is the main importance of the financial services is the economic growth. Unless the unutilized savings are mobilized towards the productive utilization, there cannot be a financial growth. And then promotion of savings, capital formation, employment opportunity, contribution to the gross national productivity, and lastly, provision of the liquidity. All these things are various important points where the financial systems that will provide. And basically, two types of assets we have identified. That is said to be, one is the financial assets, another is said to be a real asset. A real asset is one which is having a physical existence, that is buildings, plant and machinery and all, whereas one of the financial services or financial assets claims against a particular right. Say, for example, you have purchased a share. A share is a claim. A share is a right provided to the equity shareholder to claim against the company for the particular amount of money. So then, in such a case, but who are basically the two players, that is capital market and money market. This is already given to you in the previous class. And the unit number 2, various fund-based services, fund-based financial services are provided. In the case of fund-based financial services, what is exactly the meaning of fund-based financial services? And here, the money, physical amount of money is transferred to the borrower, and then, sorry, the physical amount of money is transferred to the borrower, and the borrower will pay usually the interest to the service, to the money provider, or we can call it as a lender. So, lender will provide the money to the borrower in physical existence, and the borrower will pay an amount of interest, and the borrower will pay the interest amount to the lender. So in this process, actually the physical transfer of funds will of that. As a result of that, they're able to make out on that. Then the another thing, then we're coming to the just 1 second. So I can adjust the mic. I hope it is clear for the persons who are. When we are talking about the fund-based financial services, we can have the money transfer from the person who is a money provider, who is called as a lender, and the borrower. That is, in this case of fund-based financial services, we can call as a lease financing, insurance services, factoring, housing finance, mutual funds, and so on and so forth. These are some of the fund-based financial services. When coming to the fees-based financial services, we normally call about by collecting the fees, the financial intermediary, the like banks, etc., they will provide the financial service. Here, only on the collection or the fees based. So, the financial intermediary, the like banks, etc., they will collect some sort of fees and they will provide the service. In this process, the transfer of money is limited. In this case, what are the various important this is that is managing capital issues. That is when any company is providing the shares, etc. Then when any company is able to provide share, when any company is giving offer to subscribe the share capital, then in such a case, the managing of issues will come into existence. Then mergers and acquisitions. Already merger is a combination of two, and acquisition is buying one company by the another. Credit rating services. When we call it the credit rating services, rate a particular bond or rate a particular financial asset by the firm, and the firm rate that particular financial instrument whether to buy. This will help the borrower to decide about the financial element of the financial capability of the firm to pay off the particular financial instrument. Then depository, custodial services, securitization, all these things will come under the financial fee. This is what we have discussed in the first unit and the second unit and unit number 3 and so on and so forth. With this, in the block 1, basic introduction what various aspects that are related to fund-based and fee-based financial services. Then along with that, then second, clearly discussed about the block 2. In the block 2, what are the other types of financial services that a particular organization uses to provide? In this case, we have discussed about leasing aspect, then hire purchase and venture capital. These three concepts already we have studied in the previous sessions. So before going through that, let me just have a snapshot. So if we're going to that, then we go for the leasing aspect. What is actually leasing? We usually with the term lease is already very popularly known for us. Lease, we will always say that we have taken a lease. What is lease actually? Taking the right from the person who is lessor, the person that is owner of the asset, to utilize the asset for a substantially longer period of time. You may have a confusion between a lease and a hire purchase. Hire purchase is different, lease is different. Lease is acquiring the right to utilize the asset for a substantially longer period of time. Here, lease is definitely controlled by the lease agreement, and the lessee is having altogether benefits about the various aspects. And leasing is basically used for the purpose of long-range purposes like equipment leasing, that is using the equipment for the purpose of doing the business, extraction of oils, lubricants, minerals, etc. We normally call it as coal mine leasing. Coal mine, the entire land is taken for the lease. Then out of that land, the coal is extracted, like at the same time oil refineries, that is that particular thing. And property held by the lessee is almost, he will treat as his own acquisition and he will go with that. And all the various proofs, that is for the purpose of video recordings or pictures, films, etc., are taken care of by that. And property held by the lessee is accounted for the investment property, for example, shopping malls, office complex, etc., which are taken for the lease for a substantially longer period of time. Normally, they will take lease for a maximum period of 99 years. So then coming to the process, what are the three parties that is called as lessee, lessor, and lease agreement. So lessor is the person who is owner of the asset, who will have ownership rights on that. Whereas lessee is the person who took the property for the purpose of use, that is called as a lessee. Lease agreement basically covers the terms and conditions on what basis the lease is given for that. So what is the lease rental? Then how much period it is? What is the contractual obligations from the lessee to the lessor and all. These aspects you might have studied in the accounting concepts, that is hire purchase account. So hire purchase accounts. So in the case of lessee and lessor, what are the main elements of the leasing agreements? This is the most important question to. So as essential elements are as follows. This is given in paragraph number 4.3, which is the most important aspect which every student has to understand. That is parties to the contract. So who are the parties to the contract? Lessor, lessee. So in case of leverage transaction, what is a leverage transaction? A third party or a banker. So they will come into the picture when the asset is purchased by the lessor by taking a by taking a loan or by taking a finance from other party. So if the lessor acquires the asset by means of taking a loan from the other financial institution, then the third party also will come in this particular process. Otherwise, only lessee and lessor. The person who is engaged in this particular providing finance to the leasehold asset, then he is called as a third party. Second one, asset. Asset is the subject matter of the leasing agreement. If asset is not there, no lessee, no lessor. Asset is one which is either it may be building, or it may be land, or it may be any plant or machinery or equipment or anything else. But at the same time, consideration. Third point is consideration. When we are talking about the consideration, the right to use the asset by the lessee, for that purpose, a consideration also must be matched to that. So in this process, we normally take into consideration that some amount of consideration should be paid to the lessor, and that amount will be a consideration to the work. And the lease rental may be on the basis of asset, depreciation, cost of capital, and so on and so forth. Next, fourth element is that lease period. That is for how many years this particular lease agreement is made. Then user, ownership, termination of the contract, and depreciation. All these are various terms which are very, very essential for the purpose of effective leasing program. Then another aspect is to understand types of leases actually. One is a financial lease and operational lease. So financial lease is ownership transfer will be there in that. So the asset will be transferred, then ownership transfer will be there. Whereas in case of operational lease, ownership transfer will not be there. In the paragraph number 4.7, it is clearly given, it is clearly mentioned about what are the differences between the, I will share the screen. So what are the differences between the financial lease and operational lease? Financial lease is basically coming from the point of this is a long-term lease agreement, whereas operational lease is comparatively a short-term lease agreement process in that. So this one, share. I hope now you are able to see this one. Yeah, this is what we are discussing now. Elements of leasing, types of lease, financial lease, operational lease. Operational lease is for substantially a shorter period of time. Then between the financial lease and operational lease is an important element. Then what are the permits the alternative use of funds, that is off-balance sheet financing, flexibility, protection against obsolescence, 100% financing for the small firms. These points already we have discussed in the previous class. Then hire purchase. Then unit number 5, agreement under which goods are let on hire. In case of unit number 5, these points already discussed in the previous class, just only for the recapitulation purpose we are doing out. A main important issue here is that hire vendor is the person who is basically the owner of the asset, who is giving for the hire. Then hire purchaser, who is the person taking for that. Then hire agreement. That is basically coming out. What is the agreement? Which will decide about the the terms and conditions between the lessee, between the hire vendor and hire purchaser. This hire purchase accounts you might have done in the financial account. About some of the terms in this: hire vendor, hire purchaser, and hire purchase agreement, royalty, and so on and so forth. So hire purchase is basically there. What is the difference between that is the most important element. So here you have to understand what is the difference between the hire purchase and leasing. In the case of the hire purchase, only at the end of the only at the end of the payment, then on the payment of all the hire purchase, asset will be transferred to the then only the asset will be transferred to the hire purchaser. These up till that it will be under the possession. Whereas in case of lessee also, in case of lease agreement also the same conditions may be there, and purchase option of the asset may the lessor. Then salvage value of the asset is the benefit to the lessor, whereas salvage value of the benefit is not, the salvage value will not be there for the higher vendor, because asset will be transferred to the higher purchaser at the end of payment of all the installments. These are the some of the advantages which we have discussed in the previous class. Now coming to the day class, that what we are starting now, that is block number 3, factoring, forfeiting, and securitization of the debt. In that we are talking about the just 1 second. Talking about this factoring and factoring process. What is exactly the meaning of factoring here? The factoring is basically a continuing agreement between the financial institution and the business concern. Factor undertakes the responsibility to collect factor undertakes the responsibility to debts and also purchasing the bills receivable for the supplier. Actually, what is this entire process? We let us understand for the next. So, factoring, we know very well that whenever the goods are sold on credit, there Sorry for the interruption because of the power failure. The Wi-Fi is disconnected. So when already the various aspects into the hire purchase aspects, and the main another important question: what is the difference between hire purchase system and installment purchase system? These are the another important areas what you have to cover up about. Then another aspect, that is venture capital. Already venture capital is complete. Then we are talking about the venture capital. So what is venture capital and how this venture capital works out? This is another important aspect. Venture capital basically talks about the high risk investment in that. So in this particular aspect, what are the various features of the venture capital system? That high degree of risk will be there in that, and equity participation, long-term investment, and basically achieving a social objective, investment of liquidity, and superior product development. All these things will be the major important factors which you have, which can be obtained by means of the venture capital system. Then how far the venture capital system is useful in India? This is venture capital system basically providing the very long-term funds in that. Then after that, so when the venture capital system basically provides entrepreneurship and promotes products and encourages customers, bring the financial feasibility, and all. These are the various aspects that everybody has to understand about this one. So with that, we have completed about the two blocks together. Then let me share the screen for this. Yeah, in this process we are. So when we are talking about the process of factoring, what is factoring and what are the various types of factoring is a very, very important, essential question for your examination point of view, and also to understand about this one. When we are talking about the factoring, factoring is an agreement between the financial institutions. So broadly to understand about what is the factoring system. So in the case of, for the purpose of collecting the debts from the debtors, an agency will be there in that. So the person who sold goods on credit basis, so he will come out of the risk factor of collecting the money from the debtors. You are a commerce student already you are the third year, so you can understand the terminology very easily. The person who sold goods on credit, he will be called as a debtor. So collecting money from the debtors is a difficult task for the person who sold goods on credit basis. So in this process, if any agency took the responsibility of collecting the money, recording the debtors and controlling them, protecting them, the book debts, and also the purchasing the bills receivable from the supplier, it will be a great benefit to the person who sold goods on credit. In this process, the process of factoring came into existence. So the continuing arrangement between a financial institution and a business concern. So financial institution, it may be any bank or any other financial institution, and agreement will be made between the business concern which sells the goods on the basis of the credit. That means the cash will be paid later on, goods will be delivered now. So where the factor undertakes the task of recording the debts to whom the goods are sold on credit, then collecting them, controlling them, bills of the various bills receivable given by the various debtors to the supplier. This is an important. Then types of factoring that comes. This is a very, very essential question. Types of factoring. So in the case of before going to the types of factoring, what are the primary functions of the factorer? Let us understand and go with that. So financing. So that means first he will provide finances to the seller of the goods. So once the factorer comes into the arrangement, then if the bills means that it will be discounted, then the money will be transferred. He will manage sales administration, sales-related administration. Sales-related administration, that means that to whom the goods are sold, who is the client, the maintenance of books of accounts, asset management, collection of debts, and so on, and management of the bad debts. A debt, when it is not recoverable, that becomes a bad debt, as we already know. So, in the process of that, how to manage the bad debts? This is also an important area where the factoring services that comes into effect. Advisory system also a part of the factoring system. So the factorer will undertake nearly 4 to 5 functions. So instead of raising the debt, then managing the debt, controlling the bad debts, and finally giving advice to the seller about the credit worthiness of the buyer and so on. So when this process that comes in, so how the factoring process goes on? This is actually a very important point that every student has to understand. This is given in page number 88, 7.3 paragraph number. Then you have to understand about this one. Then first, the foremost important that buyer places an order to the seller for expressing his desire to purchase the goods. So if a person wants to buy the goods on credit, he will place an order to the seller. Then immediately the seller sends this particular request from the buyer to the factorer. So instead of saying yes or no, whenever a seller who will sell the goods, who used to sell the goods on credit, will send this particular purchase request to the factorer. And the buyer and factorer put together, they will decide a credit limit. So here you may have a doubt about how the buyer is intended to. Sometimes suppose we are purchasing an open plot, then what is our eligibility? So how much I can pay, how much loan I require, all these things will be there in that. In the same way, the buyer also will be intended to go with that. So how much money is to be sanctioned, how much money, what are the terms of that, what is the installment amount, how much tenure of the period, or within how many days they can pay back, and all these things. So in such a way, the buyer and the factorer together comes to decide the credit limit to set for the particular buyer after thoroughly going out his past record and the credit worthiness. The factorer and seller now enter into a memorandum of understanding in this respect. So first, factorer, buyer. So when once buyer sends a purchase request, that purchase request will be sent to the factorer. Factorer and buyer put together, they will decide the course of action, decide the credit limit, and then the factorer will enter into an agreement with the seller, that is called as a memorandum of understanding. Once the credit is approved from the factorer, the seller raises an invoice and delivers the goods to that. When that means raising invoice means just nothing but accepting to sell the goods to him. So when once credit approval is made by the factorer, the seller raises the bill, that is invoice, and deliver the goods to the buyer with a notice that stating that the payment has to be made to the factorer. Here the main important point is that all the payments from the buyer will go to the factorer. Supplier will send a copy of invoice to the factorer that makes necessary entries in their own books of accounts and sellers. Then after delivering of the goods, the supplier or seller, he will send a copy of the invoice to the factorer, and the factorer will pay 80 to 85% of the invoice amount to the seller. If 1,000 rupees, if 1 lakh rupees sales is made on credit, 85,000 will be paid by the factorer to the seller immediately, and the remaining 1 lakh rupees total amount is to be collected from the buyer to the seller. Then factorer performs a regular follow-up of collection of the funds from the various buyers and make necessary agreements, and finally collect the dues. The factorer also sends the money to the statement of transactions with the buyer. So what are the various goods that a person is able to make out and all. So these are the various steps in case of the buyer agreement, that's the factor agreement. So this is they explain the process of factoring. That is the most important question for you. Now talking about last one, the types of factoring in that: notified, unnotified factoring, domestic versus export factoring, full factoring versus old line factoring, recourse factoring versus non-recourse factoring, advance factoring versus maturity factoring, invoice discounting, bank participation factoring, all these aspects will be there in that. So first one, notified factoring, that means which is noted and then unnotified. Domestic factoring basically talks about the goods purchased and sold within India, and export factoring is a factoring service between the two countries, cross-border actually. That is full factor, old line factoring, that is how much money is that is sold out area. The old line factoring services. Then which cannot be taken up earlier, which cannot be taken up and which can be advanced or not. So in this process, the invoice also will be discounted by the. So what are the types of factoring that you should understand and learn carefully? These are the various important aspects in that. Difference between the. Then there is forfeiting is another important element in the block number 3. So forfeiting is a method of purchasing a negotiable instrument from the seller at a discount who shipped the goods to the buyer in the another country. Actually, forfeiting is actually the forfeit means surrendering the right. What exactly the meaning of forfeiting? Forfeit, you have studied this concept, forfeiting. So share forfeiture accounts. So in the case of shares, when the call money is not paid, then the shares are forfeited. In this process also, in the same lines, the forfeiting is another process. It is a method of purchasing a negotiable instrument from the seller at a discount who shipped the goods to the buyer in another country. So if a seller sends the goods to the foreign buyer, then whatever the negotiable instrument, either a bill or a check, whatever paid by the buyer, will be purchased by the forfeitor. Purchased by the forfeitor. I am talking about purchasing. That means at a lesser amount. Say, for example, 1 lakh bill is there. That is purchased by the forfeitor at 90,000 rupees only at a discount. That is called 10,000 rupees is a discount. So 90,000 paid by the forfeitor directly to the seller, and total amount of 1 lakh rupees is collected from the buyer from the foreign country. So in this process, forfeitor will make a profit of 10,000 rupees in that. In the same way, who are the parties to that? That is exporter, importer, domestic bank, avulsing bank, and all these things. So these are the various aspects that are there in that. So what are the various costs that are involved in the forfeiting process? That is you can refer to the paragraph number 8.5. That is commitment fees. The forfeiting agency will normally charge 0.5%, 0.5 on the various bills. And discount fees, this exporter, while obtaining the quote from the forfeitor agency, it will communicate the exact amount of export made out. And then this documentation fees also will be corrected in this. These are the various important aspects. What is the difference between the forfeiting and factoring is a major important question normally which comes out in that. So forfeiting, factoring. What is the difference between a forfeiting and factoring? These points you have to understand in this. Basically, this factoring is very, very important for your block 3. What do you mean by factoring? What do you mean by types of factoring is a standard question. What is forfeiting? So how the factoring differs from the various other types of lease financing, and then what is the difference between factoring and forfeiting? Then lastly, securitization of the debt. What exactly the meaning of securitization of the debt? It is the process of converting a non-liquid asset to the liquid asset by means of simply transferring the accounts receivable. So these are the various important elements that we can understand in this. So let us stop the share now. So in this process of securitization of the debt, so originator, the borrower, they will play an important role. Simply, securitization involves conversion of an illiquid asset that is into cash. It is a process of converting an illiquid asset, an asset of balance sheet, into a liquid asset by creating securities on the basis of that. In the process of securitization. So in this process, what are the various parties involved in that? In the process of securitization, one is originator, who is developer that one. Second is a borrower. Third one is special purpose vehicle, felicitator, credit rating agency, insurance provider, investor, credit enhancement provider, banker or servicer, stock exchange, then finally dematerialization. These are the various aspects that you have to cover various when you are talking about securitization. So, what are the basic advantages of the securitization process? So, in simple, we can say that conversion of a non-liquid asset into a liquid asset. So, in this process, I can add a few words for that. Securitization of the debts, securitization of the various aspects. That means when you are securitizing, they can be very easily convertible into the process. For example, if shares, listed company shares are there, they are materialized. If they are in the paper digitalized, it is very difficult. That is called as digitalization process. So these are the various aspects that you have to. So when you are talking about, there are various advantages for the securitization aspect in this. So this process is an essential one to have a certain aspect of that. So this is the end of the block 3 also. So let us go with the block 4 and block 5 in the tomorrow's 2 classes. With that, I tried to my level best to cover up about the syllabus aspect in that. I request all the students to join the online class at least physically. I am telling this one every day in every class. Even though you are not physically coming to the classes, at least join in online Zoom session. So it will be a good motivator to the faculty who is teaching in the class. Instead of one way transmitting the knowledge, you can listen, you can understand, you can question. And then it will be beneficial to directly interact with the faculty. If only depending on YouTube lecture is secondary, whereas directly coming to the contact with the faculty member is a very, very important aspect in all respects. So it will definitely make you good at knowledge and all. So thank you very much. B.R. Ambedkar Open University technical team. Technical team, can I have your access once?